How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts! My soul longs, indeed it faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh sing for joy to the living God. In season 1 of the Dwelling Place podcast, this longing took me on a 6-month journey around the UK to dwell with a variety of intentional Christian communities, sharing interviews with community members, leaders, and founders along the way. In this second season of the Dwelling Place podcast, I invite you to join me in the US as I occasionally visit intentional Christian communities and share community-related interviews in the midst of my seminary education. In sharing these conversations, exploring the blessings, challenges, and wisdom of intentional Christian communal living, I hope to share glimpses of the transforming presence of the living God and inspire how it is we might be called to contribute to making God's kingdom manifest on earth, enabling people, God's beloved, to experience God's loving dwelling place.
My name is Andrea, and my husband Ross and I helped to start the Bloomington Catholic Worker in 2008.
And we are currently sitting in a very beautiful spring garden in Bloomington, Indiana.
That's right.
And at the Catholic Worker.
Mm-hmm.
So would you mind sharing a bit about how it started?
Yeah, when Ross and we were living in St. Francis House Catholic Worker in Chicago, and then we had our first child, Paul. So we had this baby, and we were like, maybe St. Francis House and Chicago aren't places that we want to be long-term, but we do feel called to continue hospitality and Christian community. So let's go join a different Catholic Worker. So we went on a bit of a tour and visited a few places. And then Ross sent a letter to various people in Bloomington, Indiana. He had gone to undergraduate here. And when he was in undergraduate, he learned about the Catholic Worker movement, and then went up to his professor at one point and was like, I'd like to go visit the Catholic Worker. Can you give me the information? She was like, oh, there's not one in Bloomington. And so I think that was the long ago seed that was planted. So Ross, when we were kind of wrestling with this, he was like, Bloomington, Indiana would be a great place. So he sent a letter to various, the Quakers and the Catholics and the Mennonites and Catholic charities, all in multiple churches, the Episcopal Church, all these different places. And the gist of the letter was, this family is going to come visit Bloomington who might be interested in starting a Catholic Worker. If you're interested in that in any way, shape, or form, come to this restaurant on this day, sort of thing. And so we thought we were thinking very positively, and Ross got a table, I think it was for 6 or 8 people. And thinking wow, if that many people came, that would be an amazing story. And then we ended up taking over a whole room of the restaurant, and there were 32 people that came that had some interest in a Catholic Worker, and many of them were helped to start the community and are still integral parts of our lives today. Wow. It was pretty crazy. And so the couple that offered us to move in with them to start being community together, their names are Rob and Amanda, they were at that meeting and called us soon after and were like, we'd like to open our home to do this and to offer hospitality. We were like, we don't even know you, this is amazing. So that meeting was just really a pivotal moment from us deciding we're going to join a Catholic Worker that exists. That would be so much easier. No, we really are going to start one. So then we moved down here and started a Catholic Worker.
Yeah. And so you started with the one house?
So Rob and Amanda lived on the south side of Bloomington in, they're called town. Yeah, and it was in a townhouse. So 4 homes that are basically connected, apartment style type things. And they owned theirs, and it had 3 levels. So a finished basement, living room and kitchen on the 2nd floor, and then bedrooms on the 3rd floor. And we moved into their basement in this townhouse. They lived on the top floor. And then that was in May of 2008, and it was around Thanksgiving, we had our first couple of overnight guests, and then Christmas was when we took in our first long-term guest. And all those guests just like slept on the couch in the living room. There wasn't any other space. So that it started with a couch.
Wow.
So you too can offer hospitality, whoever you are listening. It's possible.
Wow. And then you moved out of that townhouse because now we're on this.
Right. So then we I don't know exactly the order, but at some point, I don't know if maybe this house was on our radar. But at some point we had to expand to 2 houses because we had people interested in living with us and we were doing more hospitality. So then we had 2 townhouses kind of right next to each other down on the south side. And then we purchased our first home, which is the yard we're sitting in here. And it was purchased at a sheriff's sale. It was $26,000, something like that. And we had to gut the whole house. So it was a year of we own a house. But we're just constantly working on it to get it livable. And during that first year when this one was being rehabbed, the one next door, which is now called Romero House, the neighbor who was living there came over one day and just said, I think I'd like to sell my house. Would you be interested? So yes, we would. So then we bought our second house. And then new community members. Then Chris and Emily were able to move in. And we just started expanding. But yeah, so on the south side for maybe 2 years, and then we came up.
Yeah.
Everybody lived up here after that. Chris and Emily lived up here for a while we were all still down there because we couldn't live in our house. And then we all convened in what would have been early 2011 up here.
And so now you've got 4 houses and a neighboring house as well just across the road. So that's this really nice kind of...
Yes. It's one of my favorite God stories about the Bloomington Catholic Worker is because we purchased this house for very cheap, but then it needs a ton of work. This neighbor says, hey, do you want to buy my house? And we say, yes. And then a few years after that, the neighbor Alex, who lived in what is our third house, came over one day and he said, I'm almost done with grad school and I'm just wondering if you want to buy my house. And we were like, well, golly, yeah, we do.
It's like Monopoly.
Right.
Literally like a Monopoly. You've got the block.
Exactly. And then we purchased what is now Kyla's house. Our fourth house for a long time was across the street, and that was neighbor Sarah who came over and said, I'm moving. Do you want to just really... Thanks, neighbors, for offering. And then all the people who would donate so that we could buy the houses. And then just a year ago, we sold that house across the street to Kyla, who now, thankfully, she's permanently part of the block, so we get to keep her forever. And we bought the 4th house in line, which, again, the neighbor couple who lived there came over and asked if we would want to. And I think we're done with 4. So I think even if another neighbor came to us, we'd be like, no, I think we're good.
It's a very neat row, and I just love the extended shared backyard. It's just gorgeous. Also come on a good day.
Right. This is we haven't seen the sun in 4 days, so it's also extra beautiful. But yeah, having the huge backyards for gatherings and kids to play. Oh man, it was hit home during the pandemic when we're reading, newspaper stories about children in New York City apartments who are just stuck in these little cells, because we're all afraid to go out. And we were like, we have this whole space to spread out and be outside and get fresh air.
Picnic table, bonfire and chicken coop.
Exactly.
Nice decks.
Some gardens. Yeah.
Tiny house / chapel.
That's right.
Yeah. And would you mind describing the rhythms, or the way of life that the community lives here?
Yeah. So things that shape us and shape our lives together are, we do morning prayer Monday through Friday. Right now it's 6:45 a.m. in the summer. That'll get to be a little bit later. But 6:45 a.m. right now, Monday through Friday, in our beautiful tiny chapel. And Wednesdays is kind of like a together day. Wednesday morning we have a 3-hour, we call it business meeting, but it's making sure we know how everyone's doing. Also, it's our time for really pointed reconciliation, and then any agenda items. And then after we break for lunch, then our afternoons are work days together on the properties or on our newsletter, whatever the project is.
On the Wednesday afternoon.
On the Wednesday afternoon. So Wednesday morning and Wednesday afternoon are big community times. And then Sunday, and we do dinner with guests and community members Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So 4 nights a week. Thursday is also open to anyone. So often community friends will come and join us for a potluck on Thursdays. And then Sundays, we always gather at 7 p.m. for something. First Sunday is spiritual practice. Second Sunday is conversation. Third is something else. I should know these things. But yeah, there's always something that we all gather for on Sunday evening to kind of start our week off together.
Nice. And then in the midst of that, people hold part-time jobs.
Right. So our financial model, again, you'll have so much fun interviewing various Catholic workers because you'll be like, but wait, you didn't answer these questions at all. Like the next Catholic worker, we're all so different. But ours is, we gratefully accept donations from whoever donates to us. That's wonderful. But we're not a 501c3, so they're not tax deductible, which is sometimes an issue for certain people's financial situation. But we thrive on donations, but also any income that community members have is split with the community. So Ross and I are what we call covenant members. So that's the longest term committed member. We commit for 7 years at a time. So 50% of our income goes into the community pot. And then the other 50% is for our family to utilize. And then the other members right now who are at different levels of experiencing members, Ian and Gabe, 30% of their income comes into the community pot. They keep 70. So as you become like a more committed member, more of your income goes to the community and to the work of the community.
Yeah. And maybe that's a good point in the conversation to talk about the community onion and the layers of membership.
Yes. So when we refer to our onion, but funnily, it has caused problems in the past. There was ones that were Brett and Sarah, who just recently moved out. I was texting them about needing a literal onion for dinner, and I said, does anyone have an onion at their house? I just texted a general, does anyone have an onion at their house? And Brett and Sarah were like, in our living room, under the lamp, there's one. And I was like, what a strange place to keep an onion. And so I went over to their house, and I was like, I see books, I see hymnals, I see notebooks. And then I was like, oh, and I see our community onion. So anyway, that was the one time that I was like, oh, that's a good story right there.
And if people are confused, the onion is the name of your kind of handbook.
Yes, so it's our onion refers to our different layers of commitment and involvement at the Bloomington Catholic Worker. So before people come and while they're here, we always like to read from our onion and then over talk about what that layer is and what your commitment means and what your responsibilities are and aren't and all of that.
And would you mind maybe briefly touching on the different layers?
There are different layers of it. Yes, so we have a variety. We have a layer that's never even existed. We have an oblate layer. So we have a layer that would be like Lakshmi, who lives in Richmond, but loves the Bloomington Catholic Worker, but clearly can't live here. We have a layer. And now it was actually made with a specific person in mind who then changed their minds. But we even have layers that we don't even live out at all. So there's oblates, never happened. And then our general, as far as entering into the community and then becoming a deeper, more committed member. Often people start as, often, intern is the least committed. So that's 6 months to a year. And often it's the mindset of coming in with, hey, I'm going to be in Bloomington for a while. I like the idea of a Christian community, but I'm not looking to join one. I know I'm going to be there doing this other thing, so could I live with you? That's like an intern. We all know they're coming in, but also know they're headed back out. And then next layer after that, which some interns do then go into a deeper layer, but some people start as an experiencing member, which is, I don't know, maybe 1 to 2 years. We always have to refer. What did we say? What was a good idea? And that is really saying, I'm open to becoming a member of the Bloomington Catholic Worker. I'd like to live with you, become deeper relationally, get involved with different parts of the work and see how that fits me. And then from there, the heaviest discernment layer is next, and we call that the novice layer. And that's up to 4 years of you take on often kind of as much responsibility as a covenant member to really try out, like, is this life for me? Is God calling me here to these people, to this place, to this work, or not? So it's a really heavily, we expect everyone to discern, but that's the heaviest discernment layer, because then if you finish your novice years and you want to commit, then you would become a covenant member, which we do 7 years at a time. Some communities out there are a lifetime membership. Some don't have any membership length expectations at all. And so just imagine how many hours we spent coming up with 7 years, which is fairly arbitrary. It's a holy number.
It's a good number. It's a good number.
It was hours and hours, and finally we're like, okay, 7 years at a time.
What I liked reading the handbook as well was how you have these community commitments like prayer and meals and work, and if you're an intern, you just get to pick 2.
Right.
And I thought I hadn't seen that before, and I thought that was a really kind of nifty way of getting people to participate, but maybe not fully participate if it's not right with where they're at.
Exactly, yeah. So interns would just have a couple, and then experiencing members, you'd add on another. Novice, you'd want to do all the things and try them all on. But maybe it's a way of not scaring people off, to enter
really
as a, like, welcome, tip your toes. Okay, now your shins.
Oh yeah, and I was going to ask whether you'd mind sharing a bit about the creation of these onion layers or the creation of this handbook, like what experiences led to doing that.
Yeah, that's a good question. And now that you're asking that, I'm wondering, which maybe is a lot of question in community, was our community better off without it or with it? I think with it, but also there's such a clear discernment path now that it really is, it's almost a funnel of like, welcome, please heavily discern, and the funnel goes out of our community. Like, is that good? But I don't think it was good for people to kind of languish here when not being called here. Anyway, off topic, but that just like hit me just then. I was like, remember those days when no one really knew what was going on and we could all just hang out together? So at one point there were 3 families. We were living in 3 houses at that time. We didn't have our 4th house. We had 3 families. We were doing hospitality in 1 bedroom of each house. And then a couple of the houses had space for like what we would now call an intern, but at the time it was just people being like, I'm kind of interested in your community. And 2 of those people were young people in their mid-20s. One was Eileen, who was with us for a year, and one was Jonathan, who's still in Bloomington. He owns the local skate shop, Rhett Skateboards. He's great. He was here for maybe half a year. Both of them, in their experience of living here with us, offered us the gift of the wisdom that they really didn't know what exactly their responsibilities were, or what they were supposed to commit to or not commit to, or if anyone was resenting them because they were doing certain things or not attending certain things. Anyway, it was just that they both said it's very unclear. And even what you're, so like the long-term members, even what you guys are doing or not doing is unclear. So maybe you could codify this a little bit, write it out so that people coming in aren't shocked or confused by what's happening. So that was part of the impetus of doing it. And then we all, I don't know if we all, I think there were multiple of us that read David Jansen's, golly, boy, the title every time.
Intentional Christian Community Handbook.
I don't know why I can't get those words in the right order, but that is right, Lakshmi. That is the right title. So we read that, and there's this very prescriptive, very helpful chapter, which is called Why Your Community Might Need an Onion. And multiple of us read that. We were like, oh, this is how we could help people like Eileen and Jonathan understand who we, and actually this would help us understand where we're going, because a new community hasn't always like nailed down what the future goal is or where we're all headed. And so we spent years creating the onion and hashing out what layers should exist, shouldn't exist, and then all the details that go along with it. Hopefully in a way that is life-giving and kind of malleable, but also is like the riverbed. Like, it's just so helpful to have the structure of our onion, so that even if we're like, oh, that structure, we now think that's totally wrong, at least it's something to react to and make decisions about and wrestle with, rather than just being like, I don't know what an intern does, or do you know?
Yeah.
It's just been so helpful to have it as a guiding document.
Yeah. And having read The Onion,
You're one of the elite few.
I was also touched to read about, it sounds like you've got various liturgies or way of marking things in terms of goodbyes, in terms of annual kind of making of promises. So I was wondering whether you could speak to those more like meta rhythms.
Yeah, a good point. So one important rhythm for us is every year, it's in the fall, and literally our onion says something like, why does it have to be in the fall? Because fall is pretty. Something like that.
I love that line. It's because the leaves are pretty. And I was like, yes.
Because it is like all these decisions that you have to make, and we're a consensus community. So even a small like, well, what month should the intention setting service be? Can just be a conversation that goes on too long. So that one was an easy one, fall, because fall is pretty. And our intention setting service is a time where the hope would be that everyone prayerfully considers and discerns beforehand. If they're switching layers of the onion, that would be an intentional time to switch your layer. And it shouldn't be a surprise. We should all know that's what's going to happen. But you might switch your layer of the onion, or like for Ross and I, who are in year 5 of a 7-year commitment, we need to, before the intention setting service each year, think about how we've grown in this past year, what went well, what didn't go well, responsibilities we want to hold for the community going forward, ways that we want to repent for ways we haven't held the community well in the past. Anyway, all of these things we're not switching layers of the onion, but intentionally in this next year, how do we hope to act, and how do we hope to live at the Bloomington Catholic Worker? And it's beautiful. There's candles, there's a liturgy that goes with it. There's a lot. We always start with memories of our history to share the foundation of what has been, as we then get to the point of looking forward to what will be. So that we all share in the fall, and we often do it as a retreat. It's the only time during the year that all of us would get away together, just us, and really it's just an intense, kind of beautiful community time, playful and also serious. And then what else are our meta rhythms?
I remember reading something about it being, if it's your birthday month, a time to reflect on.
Our meta check-ins. Oh, we have so much crazy vocabulary. It's so weird to have this like separate language. But yes, in the month of your birthday, you should at some point go on a solo retreat, spend some time with God, think about, again, what has been, what is now, what will be, and then during the month of your birthday, you get a whole evening. It's often like 2.5 hours. It's pretty epic, where you get to talk the entire time about the past year. And it's like this state of the soul address is sometimes what we call it. But it's very intentionally prepared. And then it can be done in many different ways. You can just like go through your journal. You can, we have suggested topics like community life, family life, job life, that you might want to reflect on those specific. And then this past time I had 10 questions I wrote out on pieces of paper, and then the community got to pick which one they wanted to hear about next. Anyway, you can kind of do it however, but letting everyone know about how you're really doing in it's 2.5 hours. You just get to hold court. It's really wonderful. And then take questions. And then another rhythm that we have is that our community, some years ago, there are many Catholic worker gatherings throughout. There's these regular gatherings. The Midwest Catholic Worker Gathering in Sugar Creek, Iowa in September. And then in the spring, there's always a Faith and Resistance retreat. Anyway, there's these points of contact. Well, when we had little kids, driving to any of those points of contact was just hard. It was so hard. But we also wanted to connect with other community people. So we did create, now we just shorten it and call it the ORV. But we created a yearly gathering for Catholic workers and Christian intentional community members. And that's in May of every year. And so that is a big rhythm. It takes a lot of rhythms to get to that big rhythm.
Yeah.
And it's lovely and totally worth it and exhausting and wonderful to have that point of connection. So now what we did is basically we were like, hey, all these communities come to us because we don't want to drive.
It's very smart.
And it's been a gift, to be able to connect with people in that way.
Yeah.
And to widen it kind of beyond the Catholic worker circle because Ross and I especially have just such an intense love of Christian community as a general idea. So meeting people who share that life, the joys, the sorrows, the questions, the wrestlings is, it's just become, again, it's just a gift to have that in our lives where we can sit across the table and be like, okay, how was your year? Tell me about it.
Yeah, I feel like that's such a powerful way to like really properly check in, which can just escape if you don't make time for it.
Right. And it's like this liminal space. We're always at some sort of like camp sort of thing. And so no one is at their home base, even us who are hosting. Like this year we'll be at Camp Bedford, which is a Disciples of Christ church camp. So it's like no one has that like, well, it's my place, so I should start the crock pot. Or, we all just kind of share the responsibilities in a way that allows us to relax and hang out rather than someone needing to like host. Necessarily.
Yeah. And then in the expectations of each layer of the union, there's a very clear, like, we will say goodbye. And that's like a very clear line in the expectations you can expect a goodbye. And I remember you saying that's been a process of learning how to say goodbye well.
Yes.
So I was wondering whether you could speak to that.
I will give you the short answer, and then someday we could have the 7-hour answer. So our community started, and some of the hopes we had at the beginning. Ross and I were coming from a wonderful Catholic worker, but it wasn't, actually is now kind of super Catholic again, but these waves happen. And when we were at St. Francis House, it was not a Christian community at all. And we really wanted to live in a Christian. So we wanted to either join or ended up starting a Christian community, Jesus-centered, and then also to have reconciliation as a foundational piece of the community. At St. Francis House, it was fine, but there was no process at all for reconciliation. And so there are books written about how people respond to conflict, but when you're not talking about it and there's no appropriate channels, it gets ugly and messy. I mean, it's ugly and messy sometimes, even if you've got the channels.
Yeah.
But we realized that reconciliation would be a really important piece of starting here. So where am I going with this? What were you actually asking?
We were on goodbyes and how you got to goodbyes,
so
but I really, really want to get to the reconciliation channels. So if it feels more logical to speak about that now.
Well, somehow that all fits together because a lot of our leavings were just like not reconciled moments of humanity, in our decisions. So when we started the community, there was this great reconciliation process. And then about a year later, we realized, it's this great process that was like an academic paper written about reconciliation, but no one has actually bought into it, and we're not utilizing it, and so it's not working.
What did that look like?
So ours, I forget what our original one, I think our original one, which of course maybe is still what we're aiming for 16 years in, is that you would go one-on-one to the person that you're. And then there's different power differentials. There's a male and female dynamics. You're an angry person and I'm a meek person. It just is hard to go one-on-one, and that doesn't always feel safe and yada yada. So it just wasn't happening. So we created this new reconciliation process, which I can talk more about later. But over time, we used that reconciliation process well, but it didn't mean that we were wise in the ways of reconciliation. It was like we were all learning to flex these baby muscles that hadn't been flexed. And so over the 5 years, we tried to love each other well, but then things got tough, and there was interpersonal conflict, as there always is, and it got really big and kind of terrible. And we were living in this house with Rob and Amanda, had a bedroom where there's other people living here. So it's all kind of smashed together. But and it was Rob and Amanda and Ross and Andrea who were in this conflict, and we had no space away from each other, so it kind of always felt like this tension was terrible. So with the first goodbye, what happened was Rob and Amanda, we rented, I guess, what is now our fourth house, but we did not own at the time. We rented that house for like a 6-month lease so that Rob and Amanda could just have space. We could all discern where to go. And Rob and Amanda discerned that they should leave. We discerned that they should leave. And it was messy, and there were so many hard feelings, and it was terrible. And there's also no onion that walks us through like, hey, remember, everyone's human, everyone just wants to feel loved, so remember to throw a party, remember to be grateful, remember to articulate what you love about these people before they go. We were just like, ah! And then they left. And it was bad. And we have spoken with Rob and Amanda multiple times since then, and everyone has tried to apologize, and lots of forgiveness has been offered. I would say we're reconciled now, but we're spread to the four winds. It's not, we don't live in community. But it was just such a weight. I mean, I think most communities can relate to that story, but just such a weight to feel so like you've failed everyone. And that also you're just really angry at this person or these people, and they're really angry at you, and all anyone ever wanted was to like try to follow Jesus and offer housing to homeless people. And it was a good idea all around, but boy, the daily rub of not really, none of us really growing up in a culture that was like, do you know what's important is to be reconciled with one another and with God. It was more like, do you know what's important? Just kind of avoid those people and not learn how to talk with people that you don't get along with. That's where we were all coming from, the individualistic. And of course, probably the main problem was that I think I'm the most important, and Ross thinks he's the mother. You know, like in that maturing time, I think there was a lot of, oh, woe is me, I'm the one being done wrong, when really probably it was, oh, maybe I should think about how I need to offer more apologies and ask for more forgiveness rather than concentrate. Anyway, the cultural shift from individualism to community is hard, and that's just one way that it's hard, is with trying to reconcile with other people who are also really trying hard to reconcile with you. So we did that kind of poorly, terribly. And then Laura and David, who run Common Home Farm Catholic Worker, just 20 minutes from here, they left a few years later. They went on a sabbatical, trying to discern if they wanted to start a farm, and they decided that they did want to start a farm. And anyway, within that, is that going to be here? Is that going to be separate? Are we going to is our community going to oversee this offshoot or not? There was a lot of again, a lot of conflict came up, and interpersonal, but also it was like clashing of ideas, maybe more than just a personality thing, but the major ideas of where are we going, how much energy do we have, what can we hold, how focused on Jesus do we need to be, or can we let that lessen a little bit, or there was just a lot of bigger ideas that were clashing, that we were trying to work through and then clearly articulate, because it turns out we hadn't really clearly articulated them enough. So then Laura and David left, and that was better, but Lakshmi, it still wasn't good. It was still hard and messy. And Laura is one of my absolute best friends of all time. And part of that, I think, is the authenticity of our relationship, that there's been a lot of pain, and we keep trying to reconcile through that and remain friends. So then we have this onion that's like, you know what we don't do well? We don't celebrate anything. We're just like working really hard or in conflict, or then working really hard. But there are so many things to celebrate. And Lydia's House Catholic Worker in Cincinnati has been a good model for us, because they do lots of celebrations because you should. And so they've been a really good example for us to celebrate a variety of things. So Laura and David leave, messy. At that point, we've got this onion in place. That also was a helpful discernment for them to know that this wasn't something they wanted to commit to long term. I don't think we did a great job of celebrating them when they left. Okay, so then, a year after that, Chris and Emily, who are also another long-term family, discerned that they should leave. And we were like, okay, this is our moment. We know they're leaving. Someone's telling us they're leaving. And what we say to ourselves is, okay, let's not screw this up this time. Let's celebrate them. So with the Elams, the precedent was set that you get a Thursday night, which is like when other people come. Like you get a Thursday night dedicated to you. You get to pick out the food. We do a very, very short liturgy, but it involves all the like outside people that come in. You get a Thursday night dedicated to you. You get a liturgy. No, we do it in the tiny house, but we didn't have the tiny house then. You get a prayerful liturgy send off with anyone you want to invite that's like a closer community person on a different time. And then third thing is we get takeout or we get to go out to eat, which like we never do, but it's just like just the adults, and that's the last celebration, and it's like a very lighthearted, just joyful time together as our so thankfully, sorry Rob and Amanda, sorry Laura and David, okay, Chris and Emily, we kind of did them right, and then Sarah and Brett, who are part for 7 years, they just left, and so they live 20 minutes away now, but still in Bloomington. And so we next Sunday will have we're getting takeout and celebrating together. So we've done all the other things with them, but and then goodbyes can be emotional, of course, but kind of in all the right ways, rather than just holding the anger. Even if there's anger or hurt feelings, there is space for celebration and appreciation. And we should tell ourselves, now is the time to appreciate Sarah and Brett, about who there wasn't like anger or anything, but like now is the time to appreciate Brett and Sarah. I will think about that. What do I want to say? How do I want to remember them? Anyway, we're getting better. So hopefully we keep getting better, saying goodbye to people.
Yeah. And so that being that's part of the intentional reconciling piece, is a kind of an ethos of celebration and celebrating people.
Yeah.
And then the other key part seems to be your Wednesdays.
Yes.
So like, would you mind digging more into how?
Yeah. We just changed it a little bit, but yes. So like I was saying, like for the first year of the community, we had this like thing. We were like, oh yeah, that looks good as far as reconciliation. Well, it was called grievance time at that time too. And then, people are actually just really upset and not saying anything, and so we're still having this not explosions, but sometimes explosions, but sometimes just like, what's your main issue? I don't even know, because you're so upset about everything right now because it's been held in for so long. So then we, as a community at that time, I think there were 8 of us, we all wrote, like, we were like, okay, look at any literature, Bible, anything else that helps you understand reconciliation and sharing of grievances, and write up what you think should be our grievance statement. So we all wrote separate ones, and then we put them all together, and it was like, some things are the same throughout all of them. We'll keep that. So we did this like puzzle piecing together a reconciliation statement with everyone's who had really thought about what should our statement be. Then we come up with this, I think we really did call it, until fairly recently, we called it our grievance statement. So then we come up with this statement, and then we, during our business meeting time, after check-ins where everyone shares individually how they're doing, we read our grievance statement, which you'll also be really geeking out about that statement. We read our grievance statement, and then there's just silence as we hold space for there to be grievances.
So that happens every Wednesday?
Every Wednesday, yeah.
And that process was accumulation of different people's understandings of...
Exactly.
Nice.
So we kind of boil it down to this one document, which is our grievance statement. Then a few years after that, I don't remember exactly how it happened, but it did come across our long steeped in Christianity, yet still not mature Christians. We should also make time for confession. We're not really... That's a part of the wider idea of reconciliation. But again, we weren't calling it reconciliation. We were calling it grievance time. So then we wrote a statement about confession. Grievance statement gets read every Wednesday. Then confession gets read every first Wednesday of the month. Okay, so now we've got this going. that rides for many years. Same reconciliation process for many years. And maybe sidebar is that it was in this process, a few years into that process, that I think I said this on the NCN call, but really for years people would be like, oh, Christian community, what does that mean? What do you do? And we'd always be like, we offer hospitality to the poor, jazz hands. And which is true. We have always offered hospitality to the poor. So that is a true thing that we do. But then after comparing the labor of that to the labor of reconciliation, a few years into our reconciliation process, I was like, oh, do you know what might be most important? And do you know what's way harder than offering hospitality? Is reconciling with brothers and sisters who are all professing the same thing. And yet this is really hard. And so now whenever anyone asks, like, what does your community do? It is, yes, we do offer hospitality, but we are a reconciling community. And it's very hard. Anyway, so then a few years ago, we just kind of started calling it reconciliation time, with grievances, confessions, encouragements, and general reconciliation. So then we started listing everything, right? Because then it was like, oh yeah, confession. Oh yeah, we should definitely be confessing. And then a couple years later, it's like, maybe we could also offer affirmations to people. All these parts of reconciliation. Like we're slow. We're real slow. And then recently, Ross pointed out, maybe like a year ago, Ross pointed out that no one who was in the community at that time that we were having this conversation, it was me, Ross, Brett, Kyla, Ian, and Gabe. No one except for Ross and myself had been a part of writing the original grievance statement, but we're still using it. I mean, it's still good. People are participating in it, and no one that was in that circle had worked on the confession statement either. So we're like, huh. So we just recently decided to revisit reconciliation. We kind of did the same thing again of each individual person altering the one we had, adding or taking away things that we thought were important or not important, and then came back together. And now what we are using is actually totally based off of our friends at St. Isidore Catholic Worker Farm, excuse me, in Wisconsin. They had looked to our reconciliation statement to do their reconciliation process, and now we just took their reconciliation process and are kind of using it verbatim. And theirs, same idea as ours. We go through it every week, but it's like there are different steps. There's this like growth over the years of they looked to ours, and then we looked to theirs, and then we took theirs. So we're actually using theirs right now. We like to do experiments. So I think, I forget if it's 4 months or something, that we were like, we'll just use theirs. And theirs is, there's a statement about reconciliation, and then it's different moments. So like the first one is, take some time in quiet to examine your conscience. Is there anything that you need to confess that may have hurt yourself or others or the community this past week? So silence, people can offer. And then it's, time to talk about what harm you may have caused, and then time to offer a grievance of some, anyways, these different, it walks you through, and we have a statement read and then silence, statement read and then silence. So it's more of like a stair-steppy process.
And do you go around in a circle, or do people just speak into the space?
Just speak into the space, yeah. Totally popcorn style, whoever has something that
and you found that people participate in
yes.
that?
Yeah. I think there's always that wrestling of like, is this thing big enough? Am I going to be resentful? I don't really want to talk about it. But
you've always got next week, though. You've always got next week?
We've got next week, but what if by next week it's so big? Or, so I think it's always a wrestling process. But yeah, people seem to be utilizing it. And this last week we had a session where, again, like reconciliation kind of needs to be the point of our community. We all need to be reconciled to each other and to God. And without that, there's not a lot of foundation, especially for community. And so we say that it's the important work of our community, the real work. Sometimes we'll say it's the real work of our community, and it's allowed to take the whole 3-hour business meeting if it needs to. We were close to that this past Wednesday. That in these most recent years has been kind of rare, but it does happen where there's, there's enough hurt to take some hours to try to hash that through.
Yeah, that's amazing that you've just got the 3 hours set aside if needs be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, so part of it is like, maybe we're not being pushed, knowing that there's Wednesday morning, maybe we're not being pushed enough into the, like, address your brother and sister one-on-one. I think for smaller things, we are getting better at that. But it is so helpful in community, I think, to have a space and a time where I'm like, well, I don't really want to talk about that right now. Well, I don't have to, but I do have to talk about it on Wednesday.
Yeah.
But I will get to talk about it. You know, like, there is this time and a space. So not that you compartmentalize, but maybe that is part of what helps. Just that maybe not carry it a week or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, to know that on Wednesday, like, it is my duty to confess and to share my grievances. It's also, I need to be prepared to receive whatever hurt might need to be shared with me. So again, it says, beautiful or ugly as anyone else's reconciliation, but it is very intentional.
Yeah.
And with the goal being the beauty of forgiveness and healing and growth.
And then, so there's this kind of very reflective process of people speaking into kind of a held silent space. And then is there a time for, like, negotiation or addressing it of, like, please can you put your chopping board away on a morning? Or, like, please can you wipe the toilet seat? Is there time for that?
Yes.
But after the, like, the more reflective space, or do people respond to what people share?
People respond to what people share. And again, the like, please wipe the toilet seat could totally be shared in those moments of reflection. Or the more meta, like, I'm feeling unheard when I speak to you. Anytime I say, you know, it can be big or small. And then there is a time just to go back and forth about that. There's some helpful language that we don't say out loud, but that in the St. Isidore one that, it's not just St. Isidore. Kyla also added the extra language that we don't read out loud, but we can read to ourselves off the paper. It's like, you know, use I statements. I mean, there's these, like, helpful in the moment if you're like upset, just slow down, read it. And so part of that is you kind of hash it out how you need to, and then at the end, I'm trying to get you to understand me, can you say out loud and reflect back to me what you think I'm saying to you? And me, from your responses, I think this is how you're receiving it and what you're thinking is this, you know, so that can also be helpful in the reconciliation time to show that you've got it, or to be like, no, that's not it at all, try again. I'm still not feeling good or whatever.
And do you feel like people, like, get more used to it, like, if they're new to the community? And do you feel like people ease into that process over time or get better at it?
That's a great question.
Or for yourself, have you felt that?
I totally feel like it was a muscle that I just didn't have. And now it has grown. And I have matured in that way. But boy, it hurts just as bad every single time that someone is like, you have hurt me. Or I feel like I have to say, you have hurt me. That part doesn't feel different. It feels just as sharp and painful every single time. But the process, I mean, I think part of it is having gone through the muck and come out on the other side to reconciliation and being right with God and right with your brothers and sisters. Like, having gone through it, where you do see the other side, you're like, oh, that is what I want. It's worth the slog to get there. It's just like a lot of the Christian life. Like, it doesn't work to just be like, I'm a Christian, I get to do whatever. It's actually like we have these rules that we have to follow that are kind of hard, but then it's the most life-giving end. You know, like, if I am following this riverbed, it's so hard. Oh, actually, this is the best person I could become, or this is the freedom I was looking for, or this is the joy I have been seeking the whole time. So I think reconciliation is part of that. But it does take some practice of getting to the reconciliation side a few times before you're like, oh yeah, that's worth it. Because you grow up, I grew up, people might yell at each other every now and then, but you would just, like, stop being friends with someone if they were annoying or it wasn't, or, you know, like a pastor might leave the church because he didn't like the way the church was set or something like that. But reconciliation wasn't a cultural or familial priority or something that I was able to internalize at all.
And it still culturally isn't.
We're in cancel culture. Now it's like, it's grown to the point of exponentially so. Absolutely, I'm done with you.
Yeah.
And I am rightfully
done with you. And the rightfully bit is the critical problem with it all.
Right. And I do think that would be easier if we just went through life just being like, and I'm done with you, and I'm done with you. But eventually, like by person 27, you'd have to be like, oh wait, is it me? Because I keep being done with people. And turns out maybe I'm the one that needs to reflect internally. Like maybe it's not everyone else. I'm definitely that person. So yeah, harder work would be to reconcile, but they will know you are Christians by your love. And man, that love is sometimes a choice and a slog. And then it's real.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I'm in this class called Diversity, Community and Conflicts. I've been reading various things. And every time I'm just like, I feel like intentional Christian community is this microcosm, this little space where you get to really practice loving your neighbour and practice doing conflict well and practice reconciling. And because communities generally have some kind of framework or rhythm to help you do it, and that's something that you've done really intentionally and have worked on. And then I feel like even for people who pass through your community, I believe that if they've spent a year having Wednesday reconciling check-ins, they will be a different person and will have that muscle developed. And we'll see other people outside of community with more love and grace, is my theory.
I think that is a good theory. I mean, it really is. Anything that you practice in life, you get better at. So if it's just like, if we're just talking logistics, like you do want to practice things you want to be good at. And I would love to be good at reconciliation. I'm definitely like on the path. I'm not good at it, but we have to practice. And so like Wednesday is as good a day as any. And I bet there are Christians out there who are like, oh, 1 day a week, good job, Andrea. I do it 7 days a week. And I'm like, yep, I still compartmentalize. I still really focus on it 1 day a week. But with practice totally comes the growth I think we are called to. And I mean, it's the thing in community where I wouldn't be able to sit and, you know, if that someone visited us for a year, and when I sit with them, I bet, like, you, Lakshmi, probably think I'm a fine and nice person. Well, 7 weeks from now, you're going to be like, you know what I don't like about her? Because I can't hide my shadow self from anyone if I'm seeing you every day. And I'm sharing with you every day. So that reality of yourself getting reflected to you is a part of reconciliation with God. I think it's a gift that God is giving you. It's like people are like, this is the not delightful part of you. And you're like, oh, I'd rather just always be delightful. Well, not going to happen. And so that gift of that reconciliation of, I think God does work through people who are like, you keep doing this thing and it's hurtful every time. It's a small thing, but it's hurtful every time you do it. Oh, dang it. So that growth, we need God in it. God is gifting us with it. God is walking us through it, and it's still so much of my humanity gets in the way and bungles it up.
And I think it also helps you see others' humanity, your own and others.
Oh gosh.
And so in this semester, like looking at difference, so much of it is holding people to higher expectations or just completely othering and not really knowing. And I felt that in my experience of community, you get to know like people you're not related with really deeply. It's like, oh, this is how this person expresses anger, or this is how this person expresses their sadness, or like sometimes this person just gets moody and does this thing.
Right.
And then you start to learn like, oh, these are people, and actually maybe they weren't as angry as they made it out to be, or actually their intention was good, it just came out really clumsy. And you start to see that. And I feel like communities are, because in intentional Christian community there's such a, you're intentionally loving people, and obviously like you fail. But the intention there, it feels like a framing to practice conflict and loving, which isn't as framed outside of
it's like we're all saying community. Like we know what God is calling us to.
Yeah.
We know what we need to do as Christians. Let's try to do it in this little microcosm.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard, but let's try it here.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not necessarily that in other.
And it's like very intentional humaning.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
And like very intentional relationships, which I feel stands in such stark contrast to what we see in like mainstream society of cancel culture and just not engaging with any perspective which is different to your own.
Right.
Which then leads to these bigger divisions which we see play out on like country, global.
Right. Right. And it really, it does start here in a very small way. And hopefully, the wider cultural problem right now is so real. So I don't know any other way to fix things other like Dorothy Day speaks of the revolution of the heart, because daily you are doing the works of mercy and choosing to love. And so that, I hope, is how things are changed, but also like that's not fast enough for this huge cultural problem. It's such a slow...
But it's deep.
Yeah, it's deep, but how do we... Anyway, I've never known how to place the Christian intentional community on the wider culture. There's sometimes I'm like, how? We should do that, but how? It doesn't work.
I feel like it's a really, in all of this reading that I'm doing in seminary, I feel like intentional community speaks to so much of the context that we find ourselves in, just in being this little microcosm of like intentionality, and we're going to love with intentionality, we're going to do reconciliation with intentionality, and the way that people are transformed through that, and the muscles that you have to exercise in that situation. And I always feel like I know for myself I have been so changed by even just my relative short time in community, and thinking about young adult community, like how people, even if you're just there for a year, an intern for a year, how you come out with just a deeper awareness of how to human with other humans.
Exactly. My experience with community first started, I took a year off of college when I was just kind of bumbling around and didn't know what I wanted to do, and had always had a heart for service. And my friend Liz was going to the Catholic Newman Center on campus, and she brought home this pretty thick workbook of volunteer opportunities where you could join for a year as a young person, live with other young people. I was like, oh, that would be really neat. Well, where I ended up for that year that I took off of school was in Hartford, Connecticut with the Sisters of St. Joseph. And I lived in one of their satellite houses, like they had their mother house with 80 sisters, and then I lived in a satellite house with 5 sisters. And it ended up being just me. I was the only young person. And I would tell people all about Christian community and how amazing it was during that year. And so I would tell people like, oh, Christian community, oh, it's amazing. It's like heaven. It's so wonderful. And I was 19 and then 20 while I lived with these nuns. So God bless them. I lived with them for a year. And then I graduated from college, and then I was like, I'm going to do one more year of the volunteer work thing. I had a really good experience with the nuns. So then this time I went to Chicago, and I was with the Claretian Brothers, and I did a year living in a house with 4 other, 23-ish-year-old people. So the 5 of us lived in a pretend community for a year, and we would, had dinners, sharing responsibilities and eating dinners together, and we'd go off to our job sites during the day and yada yada. And it was terrible. It was the worst, unhealthy experience. All of us were coming from these individualistic places, and there was a substance use issue that was pretty severe, and 2 of the men were really angry and got angry with each other. Anyway, there was just all these levels. So when I met my husband that year, and he was like, I'd like to join a Catholic Worker, a Christian intentional community. And I was like, oh, no, it's real bad. It's very bad. It's hellish. Anyway, so that was I had these very different experiences. And now, as a couple years into the Bloomington Catholic Worker, when we started, hosting young people and we were getting older, that I was like, those nuns were saints and they just took care of me. It was not Christian community. It was like I had 5 moms or something. And I touted it as like, it's amazing because I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't offering them anything. Anyways, now I realize there are different forms of community, but that was like my foray into community was like, people just take care of you and they cook and clean everything for you. And you just go out with your friends and it's awesome. That was my first taste. Then 5 of us all in the same stage of life who were all like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it either. You know, just the, I guess, real stages of community. Anyway, here, hopefully we're somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. And I guess my initial experience of community was in the middle, and that I was living with 2 other young adults, but held by this kind of steering group of older people. So there was this element of like living in community for your fellow housemates and for the charity which hosts meals, but you're also held and you're also being looked after.
And you had wisdom that was holding you.
Yeah.
And we were lacking that with the 5 of us, for sure.
Yeah. That's so beautiful with the nuns as well, though, that they gave you a vision of like care, which now you can replicate.
Exactly. I do. When we have young people visit who are in the same exact, I cannot pretend I was better because they're in the same exact phase that I was in, of just oblivious to what must be done in the world, or just in this house this day. And I think, oh yeah, I will take care of them while they're here because someone did that exactly for me when I was in that same oblivious state of, it's all about me and life is great. Oh yeah, I remember that. So I think it was a beautiful lesson to carry forward, that I need to act like those nuns when I'm with the young people who are just starting out, figuring out life.
Yeah. And I really wouldn't underestimate the power of that, having experienced it more freshly. and talk to other kind of young adults who have had that experience, and how propelling it is of just giving you a vision of how things can be, and then what that sows in people, and then what they go on to do differently because they've had that experience. So it's like a ministry in itself. I think young adult intentional Christian community and having interns is a ministry in itself.
That's it. That's a really good point.
It's like a seed.
Mm-hmm.
Like
and that's the Sisters of St. Joseph, like that is directly, this story of my story goes directly back to them. Of why am I sitting here with you today? It is really because of the vision that I had. And there was, even bigger is like Sister Sally one day was like, you're not going to be Catholic, are you? And I was like, no. And she was like, okay, I can see that. She said, but if you're not going to be Catholic, you should at least be a good Protestant. There's this place I want to take you to. It's called the Hartford Catholic Worker. And so she even, beyond giving a vision of Christian care and community, also was able to know me well enough to catch a bit of what my charism might be, because the nuns talked about charism all the time. It was a new word for me. But she was like, who are you and where might you fit in? Rather than being like, you should be a nun with our order. That was never a thing. Yeah. Which could have been a thing.
It could have been a thing.
And it wasn't at all. But she was more like, you must find your path following God. And I've got an idea. How about this? And it, of course, when I went, it was like, that's terrible. I don't ever want to be a Catholic worker. But anyway, all of my story is directly goes back to the Sisters of St. Joseph.
And the power of, as a young adult, being held by a more spiritually mature community who's just living, there's like the structure, you just live the life, but you can do all your like young adulting, like, what do I do? But held in this, like, we have rhythms of prayer, we discern, we do things, and I feel like you glimpse something, and it gives you the spaciousness and a bit of like separatedness from the pressures of mainstream society to be like, what is it that I'm feeling called to do? Which
Right. And have you seen the Bruderhof book, The Another Life is Possible? It's like the
picture book?
Yeah, the picture book. I think that phrasing, that title, I think is really helpful. Yeah. Because the nuns showed me, even if I wasn't interpreting it or grasping it in that way at that time, that another life was possible. So that catching that dream and that seed, I think, is really true. That hopefully, as Christian communities, we can, the basic idea that another life is possible. Anyway, that title was very helpful. I love that book, but that title
I agree, is
right.
It's spot on. It's spot on. And I think the core of what intentional Christian community is about is being this witness that another life is possible. And I think that's for me what stands out. I also wanted to ask about the kind of the hospitality towards people, the poor and people who are unhoused, and how that ministry developed, and how that actually plays out in terms of hosting people and also having a family in the midst of that, and how
Right.
whether you partner with like any organizations in the city.
Yeah. This also has kind of morphed over the years, but the general idea for the first 10-ish years was the model of, well, at first we just had the couch, and so literally someone who was previously homeless was sleeping on a couch in the townhouses in our living room. And we didn't have expectations beyond that. They needed to be sober, they needed to be, in by 10 p.m. maybe, but we didn't have real expectations beyond that. Then when we moved into these houses on Blair Avenue, then there's a family and anchoring houses, and then we have a bedroom where someone who's previously homeless would be living. How do we survive with all these babies and toddlers and hospitality? What do we do? So we started, so people are living in our homes, and we started having house out hours. So during the day, 9 to 5, people had to be out. It's a very hard life, extremely hard life. We were like offering hospitality, but also it was very hard for people to be out. Shorter than other shelters in town, like often it's 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. for some of the shelters in town. But that's how we got through those years of babies, toddlers, also hospitality. Then I was definitely burning out. There was some homeschooling about just like the general parenting also, which is like another passion of mine. I love it. It's hard, but it's like community shapes you, parenting shapes you, who you're supposed to be. So all of these like wonderful things happened through the day, but I was getting as our kids grew and you're entering into different phases and different needs, and then like also having the needs of people living with me, I was like, oh no, I'm cracking. Then COVID hits. We pack all the houses, and thankfully the Holy Spirit was like basically patting us on the head and like, oh, good job, guys, that's not going to work. And then by their own volition, people moved out. When we were kind of like, okay, governor's going to say there's a shutdown, and we are going to follow that. So we don't want you going to Kroger and coming back. We're going to ride these 2 weeks and see where it gets. Then people were like, I don't want to do that. So multiple people moved out. So then there was just one person per bedroom. And I really think that was a spirit gift to us. It was like being like, oh, you wanted to pack the houses. That would be a terrible idea. Everyone would be so stressed out. And it would be, so during that time, it went totally fine. But there was something about the shutdown and then COVID time that allowed us to dream a little bit more. And then we totally kind of changed the way we do hospitality. We now have hospitality houses that are separate from our house. Also, our family kind of overtook the whole space of our house. So now we have 2 houses that are specifically dedicated to offering hospitality. And with that, we also created a program that people are asked to follow. So everyone needs to come to dinner 4 days a week. You've got to meet with what we call a community ally. So if there's a female guest, I'm going to meet with them once a week for at least an hour to work on what they want to work on. You'll need to do these chores. You'll need to come to Sunday night. So we have this program now that's a little more, we say like, you don't have to pay rent to live here, but think of your rent as time. Like you do offer time in order to be here. And so because we needed a way to remain really connected with people, if we're not living in the exact same space, but we've got to see them every day and interact. And so what are the excuses we're going to come up with? We're going to come up with dinner, Sunday night activity, all these ways so that we can very naturally meet up with people. So now our hospitality is in the 2 separate homes, but we interact regularly, and we're in the houses for various, cleaning and things throughout the week as well. And there's a lot of, through the years, we've learned a lot of things, but when people come to us asking for housing, we do a basic interview. All of us that live and work here sit together in usually our living room. The person comes and joins us, and then we have these interview questions that we ask them. And really after living at St. Francis House and then here, almost 20 years of interviewing people, during a conversation with someone, you can tell if they're being honest and communicating. And that's what we're looking for. We always, in the interview, will even say that we really trust in communication or what work here with the hospitality relationship. When the trust starts to break down because there's a lack of communication or incorrect communication, that's usually the beginning of the end of the relationship sort of thing. So we don't like, there's not a lot of bureaucracy in what we do, like how we bring people in. We basically have a conversation with them, and then we can kind of tell, is this going to work or not in a communal, more personal setting. And some people will come and interview with us and be like, whoa, the anonymity of a regular shelter is what I'm looking for. I don't want to be known by these people. I don't want to see you every day. I don't want to be required to sit at dinner with you. That sounds terrible. So some people will self-select out, but often people will work out really well.
And how do people come to you? Are you like on lists of
That's
shelters?
a good question. It's often just word of mouth. Frankly, our highest percentage of referrals come from people who are living here or who have lived here, who meet another friend on the street, and they're like, oh, you know where you might do well? The Bloomington Catholic Worker. So it's a lot of self, but Shalom Center, which is the day shelter in town, their social workers will refer people to us and call us. And then sometimes Wheeler Mission will, but they haven't lately. Mostly it's... And then every now and then someone will be like, I found your website. And we're always like, really? How outdated is that thing? We checked it 8 years ago? I don't know. So some random, probably spirit connections, but mostly word of mouth from other guests.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's kind of, I guess you've learned things, but mostly worked well.
For hospitality?
Yeah.
I mean, hospitality, there's stories there. Lots of stories. But for the most part, again, like, the slog is often reconciliation. I mean, if something is hard with a guest, often it's like a mini explosion of hard that then dissipates because we all get over it, or they have to move out or something. You know, it's not like an ongoing weight, which often reconciliation can be. But often hospitality is a joy. It can be, as an introvert, I can get burnt out just by the many humans that need care and interacting. But it's definitely things in my life, I would say, a joy far more than a burden. I mean, if people haven't done hospitality, there's often questions about like that are based in fear or just confusion about what it might be. And after living it, totally worth it. No reason to not do. I mean, not everyone can live in a home, and we have to have people here that can live in a home. So perhaps that is maybe too high of a bar, but we don't have problems finding people who can fit that as well. I
think we've been talking for quite a while, but
I might check on my children.
May I just ask you about maybe sustainability and how and sustainability, and then maybe pull out a key blessing. So we've talked about challenges, I feel. Unless there are any other kind of...
So sustainability is interesting because one of the things that we thought when we moved here to start this community was we want it to be a place where children could grow and thrive, and where we could be offering hospitality. And there wasn't a lot of model for that. There are communities where children are growing and thriving. There are communities that offer hospitality. Often those are separate things. And so we didn't really know how to write that story. And one of the words that we used was sustainable. We wanted it to be sustainable for families. So could you feel absolutely that your kids were safe here, but also that this, like, the work that we're doing would be a way of shaping them into who God wants them to be in a very healthy way, which also means they see a lot of the negative as well. But also they're children, so they are protected from that. Could we do that? Will this be sustainable? So it's a word we used a lot. There was our phase where we were like, the word sustainable is nowhere in the Bible. And Jesus' ministry was only 3 years. And he got killed. So we were like, sustainable maybe isn't a biblical concept, but also if we're going to keep doing it, we need it to be sustainable. So it's a tricky word because it's not a, there aren't sermons on sustainability.
Yeah, and Paul didn't seem that sustainable either.
No, exactly. So it's a tricky word, but in the end, we do want this to be sustainable as a place for families, but also for workers to be here long term. Sometimes in Catholic workers, I mean, we all Catholic workers and maybe communities, I don't know, go through phases of like, the 23-year-olds who are here for 6 months at a time, and there's this great huge turnover, and they come in and they know exactly how to do it, and they go full tilt, and they do burn out, and they leave. Yeah. And then the next, there's this cycle of young people who've got it figured out, and they're going to do it, and we're going to be way more hardcore, and we've got to take harder guests, we should serve them better, yada, yada. We're not that. We are trying to offer a home to people and to be able to do that work for a long time.
Yeah, because you've been here for 16.
Yeah, so in May this May, so in a month, we will officially we'll switch the number to 16 years. But yeah, so anyway, tricky. Should we be sustainable or not? I don't know. We'd like to keep helping people long term, but maybe we're supposed to just like burn out.
Because there are very transient community models, which are just like quite exhausting, and you just do them for a time. And I'm interested in how it is that communities do live. Like how can you be part of a community for decades?
Right.
And that's the harder thing, I think.
Right.
But you've been here for 16 years.
Yeah. Pretty wonderful.
Yeah. Any final words?
Probably a lot of final words. What a thing. What I would say is that my life in multiple different, but mostly this particular intentional Christian community of the Bloomington Catholic Worker, is so rich. And I find it there on our fridge the other day, there was this newspaper article. The point of the article, I think, was it was like rules of social engagement. And the question was, can I tell people how rich I am? And the article was literally talking about money with people and how you do that or don't do that. But the title, I was like, that is a good question. Can I tell people how rich I am? Can I articulate to people the richness that really is my life? And I think I have a hard time doing it. Even with my family of origin or my in-laws, I think I have a hard time articulating what is a very full, but very rich life of constant growth, love, relationships, seeing humanity in its like most shadow and most joyful forms, connections, like you coming for 20 hours to our community and then leaving, like those things. There's just so much beauty and richness to a life that's rooted in Jesus, reconciliation, and looking out for brothers and sisters, whether they claim to be your brothers and sisters or not, if we can see them as such. I don't know what other life is as rich, but this is the only one I've lived. I'm so blessed. So anyway, I think rich is the word. So I want to tell you how rich I am, but I still don't know necessarily how to articulate that. But can you tell people? I think you should try to tell people how rich you are.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Lakshmi.
Well, thank you so much for your time.